The Addams Family game for the ZX Spectrum 48 was a side-scrolling adventure game released in 1992 by Ocean Software. It was based on the popular movie of the same name that came out in 1991. It is a side-scrolling platformer with adventure element. The story is about Gomez Addams, who must rescue his kidnapped family members by navigating a large mansion filled with creepy crawlies and spooky hazards. For gameplay, you control Gomez as he jumps, climbs, and avoids enemies. He can also collect power-ups and use wacky weapons like exploding cigars. It has unique features. For the Spectrum game, it had impressive graphics and sound for the time. The game world was massive, with 240 screens to explore, and it captured the kooky humour of the Addams Family franchise. Released in 1984 alongside the film's hype, Alien for the ZX Spectrum 48K is a unique experience. For its gameplay, it's a strategic combat game, not a run-and-gun shooter. You control the entire crew of the Nostromo, giving orders through menus. A map shows the ship's layout, crew member locations, and damage. The alien can move freely through vents, adding a tense element of surprise. There are two main objectives. Eject the alien into space via the airlock, escape in the shuttle while destroying the Nostromo, a desperate last resort. Some of the challenges were, crew members have individual personalities and may disappoint orders if scared. Jones the cat can help locate the alien, but he only trusts certain crew members. The alien's limited graphics don't convey the full horror, but the suspense of the movement and the crew vulnerability builds tension. The reviews were mixed. Some appreciated their strategic depth, while others found the menu-driven gameplay clunky. Despite its limitations, the game captured the film's atmosphere and offered a challenging puzzle to outsmart the alien. Aliens 1986 for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a game based on the popular sci-fi movie of the same name. Its genre was advertised as a mix of arcade and adventure, with elements of both exploration and shooting aliens. The gameplay you could control with a squad of 6 Marines, including Ripley, and guide them around the alien-infested colony. You can switch between each Marine and give them orders to move, shoot, and interact with objects. Your ultimate goal was to reach the Alien Queen's chamber, rescue Newt, and escape. The game throws plenty of challenges at you, including alien encounters, navigating maze-like environments, and managing your Marines' health and ammo. The game was developed by Electric Dream Software and released in 1986. There was also a US version released in 1987, which was a port of a different Aliens game originally designed for the Commodore 64. Reviews were generally positive, with some praising the tense atmosphere and the challenge, while others noted the limitations on the Spectrum hardware in portraying the action. The Back to the Future game for the ZX Spectrum 48K was released in 1985, the same year as the movie. It was developed by Electric Dream Software. It's loosely based on the movie. It's a mix of arcade and adventure gameplay. Details are a bit light, but it involves controlling Marty McFly and navigating through various scenarios from the film, possibly with some action elements. Reviews are scarce, but like many early movie-time games, it likely wasn't a critical darling. Released in 1990, Back to the Future Part 2 for the ZX Spectrum 48K wasn't exactly a time-travelling triumph. It's an action-adventure game with 5 levels based on scenes from the movie. Expect brawls and puzzles as you navigate through 1985 and 2015 Hill Valley. You'll encounter characters from the film like Marty McFly, Doc Brown, Biff, and Griff. There were limitations on the Spectrum 48K, the graphics were blocky, a commonality for games on the ZX Spectrum. Don't expect much in the way of music throughout the game. Compared to other versions released on consoles like the Amiga, the Spectrum port was considered a less polished experience. The Spectrum Plus 3 version offered a perk, animated intro sequences, a rarity for the platform. The game received mixed reviews, though some appreciated the variety in gameplay, which were fighting and puzzles. Back to the Future Part 3 was a 1991 action arcade game for the ZX Spectrum, playable on both the 48K and the 128K models, developed by Probe Software and published by Imageworks. It captured the spirit of the third movie in the Back to the Future trilogy. It's arcade action. You control Marty McFly as he navigates through the Wild West town of Hill Valley in 1885. The game involved avoiding enemies, collecting items, and completing tasks related to the movie's plot. As a single player, you embark on a time travel adventure as Marty, facing the challenges alone. The game used the Kempston redefinable joystick, a popular option for the ZX Spectrum. Released in 1989 alongside the Tim Burton film Batman the Movie, Batman the Movie for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an arcade-style action game. For the gameplay, you control Batman as he battles his way through 5 different stages, taking down thugs and facing off against the Joker himself. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with Batman punching, kicking, and using gadgets to defeat enemies. The game features 5 distinct levels, each with its own challenges. You might be navigating the Batcave, exploring Gotham City rooftops, or infiltrating Axis Chemicals. Due to the limitations of the ZX Spectrum, the graphics were blocky, but captured the essence of the Batman universe. The game was well received, even winning Best Overall Game in the 1989 Crash Readers Awards. While some reviewers critiqued the repetitive gameplay, fans enjoyed the action and seeing Batman come alive on their home computers. Beverly Hills Cop was a game released in 1990 for the ZX Spectrum computer, based on the popular action comedy movie franchise, in an arcade-style action game where you take control of Axel Foley, the wisecracking Detroit cop from the movies. The game throws you into various situations rather than having a linear path. You'll experience car chases, shootouts on foot, and even defusing bombs. It's reminiscent of another ZX Spectrum title, Technocop. Due to the limitations of the ZX Spectrum, the graphics are a blocky 8-bit style, but fans of the retro games might find it charming. The sound uses the computer's built-in AY chip for sound effects and music. The Bigles game for the Spectrum 48K was a 1986 release based on the movie Bigles Adventures in Time. It was an arcade shoot-em-up published by Mirrorsoft Limited. You control Bigles' biplane and fight enemy aircraft across different time periods. The game received mixed reviews, with some finding it enjoyable and others criticizing its simplicity. It's a single-player game with joystick controls. Bigles featured scrolling levels and beeper music. There was a confusion with another Bigles title for the Spectrum, which was actually the adventure game in 2 parts, Time Warp and The Secret Weapon. Released in 1986 for the ZX Spectrum 48, Big Trouble in Little China was an arcade adventure game based on the classic film of the same name. It was an action-adventure game. It combined the elements of exploration with combat. You controlled trucker Jack Burton as he navigated Little China, fighting enemies and solving puzzles to progress. Reviews were mixed. Some praised the attempt to capture the movie's script, while others criticized the repetitive gameplay and clunky controls, common for games of that era. The game was developed by Focus Creative Enterprises Limited and published by Electric Dream Software. It was a single-player experience, but due to licensing issues, the game was later pulled from distribution. There was a game called Blade Runner released for the ZX Spectrum 48K in 1985 by CRL Group plc, though it wasn't based on the Ridley Scott film, but rather a loose inspiration for the general concept of replicants. It still offered an interesting experience for home computer gamers. You play as a bounty hunter tasked with eliminating replicants, droids in the game, who have infiltrated the city. You control a flying car called a skimmer to navigate the cityscape and take down the replicants. The game portrays a dystopian future with dark and gritty atmosphere, reminiscent of the film's setting. The game allowed for redefinable keys so you could customize the controls to your preference. The game received mixed reviews, with some praising the atmosphere and concept while others found the gameplay repetitive. Cobra was an arcade-style platform game released in 1986 for the ZX Spectrum 48K by Ocean Software. You control Cobra through side-scrolling levels filled with enemies. Cobra bumps enemies with his head to defeat them, which is a bit unusual for the time. There are 3 levels with increasing difficulty. You score points by defeating enemies and collecting power-ups. An interesting feature is a woman who sometimes follows you around. Some speculate she acts as a shield for one hit. Mostly she just adds to the chaos on the screen. Reviews were mixed. Some enjoyed the fast-paced action and colourful graphics for a Spectrum game, while others found the gameplay repetitive and the controls a bit clunky. There were some minor graphical glitches, and the lack of music, replaced by simple beeps, on the Spectrum version compared to other platforms brought down the experience for some. The Ghostbusters was a flight simulation game released in 1985 for the ZX Spectrum 48K computer. It was developed by US Gold and put you in the pilot seat during the famous World War II raid on German dams. You pilot a Lancaster bomber flying over enemy territory towards your target dam. You use instruments and gauges to navigate and line up your bombing run. The game features different difficulty levels. The Ghostbusters was known for being difficult to play. Mastering the control to the plane and accurately dropping your bouncing bomb was no easy feat. There were also versions for the Commodore 64 and Amstrad CPC, but the Spectrum version was particularly remembered for its complexity. Darkburn game released for the ZX Spectrum, but it came out on the 128K version, not the 48K version. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with some platforming elements. You control Peyton Westlake, taking on Durant's goons across 6 levels with locations like Chinatown and rooftops. Reviews mention it can be quite challenging, so be prepared for a tough fight. It got mixed reviews, some praised its colourful graphics and music, while others found the gameplay repetitive. There wasn't a two-player mode, unlike some popular games at the time, and you couldn't pick up weapons during the game. Dick Tracy for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a run-and-gun game released in 1990 by Titus. It is based on the 1990 Dick Tracy movie. It's an arcade shooter where you play as Dick Tracy navigating the city streets and battling gangsters. The game involves shooting and punching enemies. Reviews mention that the game is fairly standard run-and-gun shooter, though it capitalizes on the Dick Tracy license. Death Wish 3 for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an action game released in 1987 by Gremlin Graphics. It tied into the movie of the same name, putting you in the shoes of Charles Bronson's character Paul Kersey, a vigilante taking on the city's criminal underworld. It's an arcade actioner. You navigate a side-scrolling New York City, eliminating gang members. It has a 2D graphics with its side view. You have access to your firearms, each with different firing styles. A map and a compass help you find your way around the city, and the game throws enemies at you constantly, requiring good reflexes and shooting skills. Reviews were mixed, with some finding the graphics impressive for the time, but the gameplay repetitive. The Empire Strikes Back for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game released in 1988 by Domark. Here's a breakdown of the key features. You control a ship, likely a X-Wing or a Snowspeeder, depending on the level, and battle TIE fighters and other Imperial forces. The game used pseudo 3D graphics, which was common for the time on the Spectrum. It featured the classic Star Wars theme music by John Williams. It was a single-player only experience. The game was known to be challenging, with unforgiving enemies and limited lives. The game was a port of the arcade game released in 1985, and it received positive reviews, even winning a Crash Smash award from Crash magazine. Friday the 13th for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an arcade action game released in 1986 by Domark Limited. It was based on the popular slasher films of the same name. You play as a sole survivor of a summer camp terrorized by the machete-wielding maniac Jason Voorhees. Your goal is to find other campers and lead them to safe sanctuary where Jason can't reach them. The game is an endless loop where you need to keep finding and gathering campers. There is no final victory, just surviving as long as possible. Reviews for the game were mixed. While it captured the horror theme, the repetitive gameplay and somewhat clunky controls brought down the overall experience. The 1984 Ghostbusters game for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a tie-in with the popular movie of the same year. It's an arcade adventure where you explore environments, battle ghosts, and complete objectives. You control one of the Ghostbusters, likely Peter Venkman, based on reviews. You use your proton pack to capture ghosts and navigate a map of New York City, responding to calls. Reviews were mixed, some praised the atmosphere and capturing the ghosts, while others found it repetitive and technically limited by the Spectrum's capabilities. Notably, it was runner-up for the 1984 Golden Joystick Award for Game of the Year. Released in 1989 alongside the movie of the same name, Ghostbusters II for the ZX Spectrum was an arcade game developed by the Oliver twins and Force Field. You take control of a single Ghostbuster, capturing ghosts with your proton pack in various levels. It's an action-packed experience with focus on capturing ghosts and avoiding hazards. The game features multiple levels across different locations from the movies. Ghostbusters 2 is playable on both the 48K and 128K versions of the ZX Spectrum. The 128K version boasts a multi-loader and potentially some enhanced graphics or sound effects. Reviews of the games were mixed, with some finding it enjoyable and others criticizing its difficulty. Released in 1986, the Goonies for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an arcade platformer game based on the popular movie of the same name. Developed by Paragon Programming Limited and published by US Gold Limited, the game captured the essence of the film with its characters and quest. You control the Goonies gang, Mickey, Mouth, Data, Steph, and Andy, as they navigate through underground levels. Your goal is to find One-Eyed Willie's pirate ship and unearth its treasure to save the family's homes from foreclosure. The adventure is riddled with obstacles and enemies. You'll encounter hazards like steam vents, bats, slime, flying skulls, and an octopus. The game supports 2 multiplayer mode, allowing you to team up with a friend and take on the challenges together. This is a classic platformer where you'll need to jump over pits, climb ladders, and dodge enemies to progress. The Gra Escape was an isometric adventure game released in 1986 for the ZX Spectrum 48K by Ocean Software. It was inspired by the 1963 movie of the same name, which tells the true story of a mass escape by Allied prisoners of war from a German camp during World War II. It's an arcade adventure. You play as a prisoner of war in a camp and must orchestrate a daring escape. You'll explore the camp, collect objects, interact with other POWs, and solve puzzles to overcome obstacles. The game used the isometric 3D perspective, which was somewhat unique for the Spectrum games at the time. The game is known for being challenging. There are guards to avoid, items to collect, and a time element to consider, as keeping the morale of your fellow POWs high is important. The Gremlins game for the ZX Spectrum 48K, released in 1985, was a text-based adventure game based on the popular movie of the same name. It was a text adventure with some illustrations. You play as Billy Peltzer, the protagonist from the movie. After accidentally feeding Gizmo's offspring after midnight, they transform into mischievous gremlins led by Stripe. Your goal is to save the town of Kingston's Falls from the Gremlins. The game uses text descriptions of locations and interactions. You type in commands and navigate the environment, interact with objects and solve puzzles. There are also some static illustrations sprinkled throughout to enhance the atmosphere. Gremlins 2, the new batch for the ZX Spectrum 48K, was released in 1990 by Toposoft and developed by Spanish developers. It's a platformer or action game based on the movie of the same name. It involved Billy Peltzer navigating through Clamp Tower, avoiding gremlins and completing objectives. There isn't much information available online about reviews or critical reception of the game. Highlander, released in 1986 for the Spectrum 48K by Ocean Software, is a licensed game based on the movie of the same name. It is a single-player beat-em-up with focus on sword-fighting duels. You play as Connor MacLeod, the Highlander, battling your way through time to face off against other immortals. You'll progress through 3 stages, each featuring a different opponent and location from the movie. 16th century Scotland against Ramirez, modern-day New York City against the Kurgan. The combat is a bit complex for the Spectrum's limitations. You use multiple buttons for different attacks, blocks, and movement, making it challenging to master. Reviews for the game were mixed. While some praised its attempt to capture the sword fighting and faithfulness to the movie's concept, many found the controls to be too difficult and the gameplay repetitive. Hudson Hawk came out on the ZX Spectrum 128K. It was released in 1991 by Ocean Software. The gameplay was a side-scrolling platformer where you control Hudson Hawk, tasked with retrieving stolen Leonardo da Vinci artifacts to stop a criminal organization's gold-making scheme. It's a side-scrolling platformer. You guide Hudson Hawk through various levels, avoiding enemies and traps to collect Leonardo da Vinci's artifacts. The game has multiple levels and different themes, such as an auction house, the Vatican, and Leonardo da Vinci's castle. You'll encounter security guards, guard dogs, laser beams, and even deceptive nuns. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was released in 1989 for the ZX Spectrum 128 and 48K by US Gold Limited. It's a side-scrolling action game where you control Indiana Jones. It features multiple levels based on scenes from the movie, brawling with enemies like Nazis and thugs, dodging traps and hazards, solving puzzles to progress. It's a 2D side-scrolling with blocky characters due to the limitations of the Spectrum. It used an AI sound chip. It had basic sound effects and music. Reviews for the game were mixed. While some praised the action and faithfulness to the movie's setting, others criticized the repetitive gameplay and somewhat clunky controls. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was released in 1987 by US Gold. It capitalized on the popularity of the movie of the same name. It's a single-player platformer. You control Indiana Jones as he navigates the treacherous Temple of Doom. Your mission is to recover the stolen Sankara stones and rescue kidnapped children from the clutches of the evil Mola Ram. You'll use Indy's whip to swing across chasms, fight enemies, and solve puzzles. Be prepared for some frustrations. The game is known for its tricky collision detection, meaning Indy might get hit even if it looks like he dodged an enemy. There's also a time limit to rescue children, adding pressure. While the graphics are not super detailed due to the limitations of the Spectrum, the game offered a decent representation of the movie setting. Reviews were mixed. Some enjoyed the Indiana Jones theme and challenge, others found the controls and collision a bit clunky. Released in 1989 by Domark, License to Kill was an action arcade game for the ZX Spectrum and 128K computers. It was based on the James Bond film of the same name, starring Timothy Dalton as 007. It's a single-player arcade actioner, where you control Bond as he battles his way through various levels, taking down enemies and completing objectives. It's a side-scrolling or top-down perspective, common for Spectrum games. Reviews for the License to Kill were mixed. Some praised the action and challenge, while others criticised the repetitive gameplay and visuals. The Living Daylights was an action game released for the Spectrum 48K in 1987, based on the James Bond film of the same name. It's a side-scrolling action game where you control Bond as he navigates various levels. You fight enemies, collect items, and complete objectives that loosely follow the plot of the movie. Expect to battle enemies with punches and kicks, use gadgets like laser watches, and dodge hazards. The game has multiple levels with different themes, like a circus and a snowy mountain base. Reviews were mixed. Some praised the action and variety, while others criticised the repetitive gameplay and clunky controls, which were common for the time on the Spectrum. The Masters of the Universe movie game for the ZX Spectrum 40K was an action-adventure title released in 1987 by Gremlin Graphics. It blended action elements with some puzzle solving, making it an action-adventure game. It's based on the 1987 live-action Masters of the Universe movie, where you take control of He-Man on a quest to stop Skeletor. Your goal is to collect 4 cores of time scattered across Eternia to activate the Cosmic Key and defeat Skeletor. The game used the standard Spectrum controls, possibly with a cursor interface for movement and separate buttons for actions. Some version might have supported joysticks, like the Kempstone joystick. Reviews were mixed. While some enjoyed the He-Man theme, the graphics and the gameplay were considered average compared to other titles at the time. Navy SEALs came out for the ZX Spectrum 128K. It's an action arcade game released by Ocean Software in 1991. You control a team of Navy SEALs on missions involving hostage rescue and destroying enemy stockpiles. The game features 2 missions, top-down perspective, redefinable controls, and simple graphics and sound. Overall, Navy SEALs seems to be a well-regarded action game for the ZX Spectrum 128K, offering players a chance to take command of an elite special forces unit. The Never-Ending Story for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a text-based adventure game released in 1985 by Ocean Software Limited. It was designed to be faithful to the film of the same name, which itself was based on the first half of Michael Ende's fantasy novel. Text-based adventure game with some illustrated scenes. You take on the role of Atreo, a young warrior tasked with saving the fantastical world of Fantasia from the consuming nothingness. The game follows the plot of the film, with Atreo encountering characters like Falcor, the Luck Dragon, Rockbiter the Giant, and the mysterious Gmok. You need to solve puzzles, navigate conversations, and make choices that will affect the story's outcome. While playable on the 48K Spectrum, the game also had a 128K version that potentially offered some enhanced features. The game received mixed reviews, with some praising its faithfulness to the film's story, and others criticizing the text-heavy nature and lack of action. There was a sequel, The Never-Ending Story 2, released in 1990, but it wasn't a well-received game at first. Nightbreed, also known as Nightbreed the Action Game, was a 1990 action game for the ZX Spectrum 48K and 128K. It was developed and published by Ocean Software Limited and based on the Clive Barker movie of the same name. It's an action-adventure where you play as Aaron Boone, navigating through a monster-filled city of Midian. You battle various enemies, including berserk, humanoids, giant insects, and monstrous demons. You can punch and kick enemies, or pick up pistols from defeated foes. Reviews were mixed. Some praised the faithfulness to the movie's atmosphere, while others criticized the clunky controls and repetitive gameplay. It wasn't a critical darling, but for fans of the movie or those who enjoy retro action games, it can be a campy good time. Nightbreed was released alongside another game, Midnight Resistance, in a double pack. The game offered a number of limited lives, with a decaying skull representing your health. Platoon for the ZX Spectrum 40K was a 1988 release by Ocean Software Limited. It was a single-player arcade shoot-'em-up based on Oliver Stone film of the same name. It's a side-scrolling shooter where you take control of a soldier, making your way through various Vietnam scenarios like the jungle, the village, or even the 3D section. You shoot enemies, collect grenades and power-ups, and try to survive. Reviews were mixed. Some liked the action and challenge, while others found it repetitive. Predator was released for the ZX 48K Spectrum in 1987 by Activision. However, it wasn't exactly a critical darling. It's an arcade shoot-'em-up. Its reception was not great, reviews were low, citing the rush feel and poor conversion from other platforms. You played Dutch, a soldier facing off against the Predator. While playable on the 48K, it was designed with limitations. The 128K version had some better sound. Predator 2 for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a 1991 game released by Imageworks that put you in the shoes of LAPD officer Lieutenant Harrigan, played by Danny Glover in the movie. It's an arcade-style shoot-'em-up similar to the classic Operation Wolf. You view the action from a first-person perspective and blast away at gang members and alien scum throughout the game's levels. You can use a joystick or cursor keys to aim and fire your weapon. The game was playable on both the 48K and 128K versions of the Spectrum, though the 128K offered a multi-loader feature. Reviews were generally positive, with the game scoring an average of 78%. The Rambo game for the ZX Spectrum 48K was released in 1985 by Ocean Software. It's an action game loosely based on the film Rambo First Blood Part II. You take control of John Rambo and navigate a side-scrolling jungle environment, focus on stealth rather than full-out action. Firing guns attracts enemies and making things harder. Silent weapons like knives and arrows are your friend. There are multiple levels with different objectives, typically involving rescuing prisoners of war and reaching an extraction point. The game offers some challenge and requires strategic thinking to avoid getting overwhelmed by enemies. It has simple graphics by ZX Spectrum standards, but captures the essence of the jungle setting. It has redefinable controls, allowing you to customize your playstyle. There is a choice of difficulty level. The game received mixed reviews upon release, but with some praising the challenge and others finding it a bit repetitive. Rambo III for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an arcade-style shoot-'em-up released in 1988 by Ocean Software. You take control of John Rambo, blasting your way through hordes of enemies. It's a side-scrolling game where you move Rambo left and right, shooting enemies that appear on screen. The game is known for its fast-paced action and somewhat loose adaptation of the movie's plot. The game was playable on both the 48K and 128K Spectrum. It used the limitations of the 8-bit computer to create a blocky but colourful world. Controls were simple, typically using the cursor keys to move and button to fire. Receptions were mixed at the time. Some praised the game's action and challenge, while others found it repetitive and lacking in strategy. Rambo III is a classic example of a movie tie-in game from the 8-bit era. While not necessarily a critical darling, it offers a nostalgic experience for those who grew up playing games on the ZX Spectrum. Red Heat was a beat-em-up game released in 1989 for the ZX Spectrum 48K computer. Red Heat is a side-scrolling game where you play as a character fighting your way through hordes of enemies, use punches and kicks to defeat them, and progress through the levels. The game was playable on the ZX Spectrum 48K and even supported 128K version with a multi-loader. Controls were handled through the cursor interface and Kempson joystick. The game offered basic sound effects using an AY chip. Red Heat received average reviews with a score of around 75%. While some reviewers found it enjoyable as a button-mashing game, others criticized its repetitive nature. Released in 1989 by Domark, Return of the Jedi for the ZX Spectrum 40K was an action game based on the popular Star Wars movie. It was a single-player game with isometric 3D graphics, which was a departure from the classic vector graphics of the previous Star Wars games for the platform. The game incorporated different stages mimicking the movie's events. You pilot the Millennium Falcon, take part in speeder bike chases on Endor, and even fight in X-Wing starfighter missions to destroy the Death Star. There were difficulty settings, easy, medium, and hard, but on easier difficulties, completing the game just meant restarting from the beginning. Reviews of the game were mixed. While some praised the clever level transitions and switching between vehicles, others found the graphics basic and the gameplay repetitive. Released in 1988 by Ocean Software, the RoboCop game for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a side-scrolling action game based on the popular movie. You play as RoboCop, tasked with taking down criminals and completing objectives related to the film's plot. The game features run-and-gun action with limited platforming elements. You collect capsules for ammo refills, better firepower, and three-way bullets. Replenish RoboCop's energy by finding baby food scattered throughout the levels. The game was playable on both 48K and 128K versions of the Spectrum. It utilized the capabilities of the machine, offering colourful blocky graphics and sound effects for the time. Controls were via joystick or keyboard. The RoboCop game received mixed reviews. While praised for its faithfulness to the movie's themes and impressive graphics for the Spectrum title, some reviewers found the controls clunky and the gameplay repetitive. Released in 1990 by Ocean Software, RoboCop II for the Spectrum 128K was a well-received action game. You control RoboCop, battling through 7 challenging levels. It's an action-packed game experience that tests your reflexes, problem-solving skills, and coordination. Your objective is to defeat the powerful RoboCop II, the main antagonist. The game offers smooth, multi-directional scrolling for navigating the levels. You can pick up power-ups that enhance RoboCop's abilities, like improved weaponry. It supports both joysticks and keyboard with fully redefinable controls for a personalized experience. The Spectrum 128K version utilizes the AY chip for the game's audio. RoboCop 2 was critically acclaimed, even winning the Crash Readers Awards for Best Overall Game of 1990 from the magazine Crash. Reviewers praised the game's faithfulness to the movie's action sequence and its overall challenge. RoboCop 3 for the ZX Spectrum, playable on both 48K and 128K versions, was a 1992 action game developed by Probe Software Limited. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you control RoboCop and fight a variety of enemies like punks, robots, and ninjas. You use your fists and RoboCop's arsenal weapons to take them down. There are 3 levels with distinct environment, taking you from the streets to a factory setting. Watch out for your energy levels, which deplete as you take damage. You can find repair tokens to replenish your health and keep RoboCop in fighting form. Due to the limitations of the 48K Spectrum, the game is primarily monochrome. However, it captures the essence of RoboCop's look and the action feels fluid. This is a game based on the classic cult film The Rocky Horror Show, released for the ZX Spectrum in 1985. The Rocky Horror Show on ZX Spectrum is a mix of arcade and adventure elements. The story revolves around rescuing your character, either Jen or Brad, from the clutches of the maniacal Dr. Frankenfurter. The villain has activated a Medusa machine to turn your character to stone, and you must race against time to find the scattered parts of a de-Medusa machine to reverse the petrification process. The game features exploration of a creepy castle, which is secretly a spaceship, and interacting with various characters from the film, including Riff Raff, Magenta, Columbia, Rocky Horror, and Eddie. You'll need to solve puzzles and avoid dangers to progress. Reviews for the Rocky Horror Show on ZX Spectrum were mixed. While some praised its faithfulness to the source material and inclusion of iconic characters, others found the gameplay repetitive and the graphics somewhat lacking by 1985 standards. The Running Man was an arcade action game released in 1989 for the ZX Spectrum 48K and 128K plus 2 models by Grand Slam Entertainment. It's an action game based on the movie of the same name, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. You play as a contestant on the deadly game show, running through arenas, avoiding hazards, and battling enemies. Reviews were mixed, but some find it charming for its capture of the movie's spirit. Short Circuit 1987 for the ZX Spectrum 48K was a game based on the popular movie of the same name. It is a unique blend of arcade and adventure genres. It's an arcade adventure. The game was divided into two parts. You controlled Johnny Five, the lovable robot, and navigated through various challenges. It involved a mix of dodging enemies, solving puzzles, and using Johnny Five's unique abilities. The 48K version required multiple loads from the tape, while the 128 version offered the entire game from memory for a smoother experience. The 128K version also boasted better sound and graphics. Reviews were generally positive, with some publications awarding it accolades. However, it's important to remember that game design standards were different in the 8-bit era. Star Wars was released for the ZX Spectrum 48K in 1987 by Domark. It was an arcade-style shoot-'em-up that took you through three key sequences from the original Star Wars film. The trench run on the Death Star. This was the climax of the game, where you piloted the X-Wing fighter through the narrow trench and fired torpedoes at the Death Star's weak spot. The attack of the Death Star. You fly your X-Wing fighter through a maze of turbo laser towers defending the Death Star. The escape from the Death Star. After destroying the Death Star, you had to blast your way out of the exploding battle station. The game was praised for its faithfulness to the movie, with its recognizable sound effects and graphics that were impressive for the time. It also had multiple difficulty levels. However, like many games of the ZX Spectrum, it was quite challenging. Terminator 2 Judgment Day was the game released in 1991 for the ZX Spectrum 48K. It's an arcade action game where you play as a lone warrior fighting against machines. The game offers an immersive experience, but due to the limitations of the 48K Spectrum, it won't be as visually detailed as some other platforms. The game follows the movie's plot where you're battling machines sent back in time from Skynet to alter the future. Released in 1986 by Ocean Software, Top Gun for the ZX Spectrum 48K is an arcade shooter game based on the popular movie. It's a fast-paced dogfighting experience where you take control of an F-14 Tomcat. You'll engage enemy jets in aerial combat, firing missiles and bullets to take them down. Locking onto enemies with missiles is crucial, but if they fire first, you can deploy flares to deflect them. Beware though, enemy fire seems pretty accurate. There are no defined levels or missions. The goal is to survive as long as possible and rank up points. The game utilizes vector graphics, common for the era, giving it a clean wireframe aesthetic. Some versions have sound effects while others lack the music due to memory limitations. It supports up to 2 players with joysticks for competitive dogfighting. While not a perfect simulation, Top Gun was praised for its addictive gameplay and capturing the feel of aerial combat. It even won a Crash Smash award for the Crash magazine in 1987. The ZX Spectrum game Total Recall is actually quite interesting because of its development history. Released in 1991 by Ocean Software, it was an arcade action game for the ZX Spectrum 128K, not the 48K. There was an early attempt at the game by a different programmer, but it wasn't up to snuff and scrapped. A new team came in and built a whole new Total Recall from scratch in just 2 weeks. It was generally well received, even winning awards from gaming magazines like Sinclair User. The Untouchables for the ZX Spectrum 48K was an arcade-style action game released in 1989 by Ocean Software. You take on the role of Elliot Ness, leading a squad of federal agents to clean up 1920 Chicago and bring down Al Capone's mob empire. It's a side-scrolling action game where you shoot gangsters, dodge bullets, and collect evidence. The game throws enemies and obstacles your way, testing your reflexes and shooting skills. You need to strategically take cover and use your limited ammo wisely. The Untouchables was playable on the 48K and 128K versions of the ZX Spectrum. The James Bond game, based on the movie of A View to a Kill, was released for the ZX Spectrum 48K in 1985. The official title was A View to a Kill, the computer game. It's an action game that features scenes reminiscent of the film, including a driving sequence and a final showdown. The game is divided into 3 sections. A first-person shooting sequence where you control Bond as he chases Mayday in a taxi, a driving section where you navigate the streets of Paris, and the final confrontation. The game uses a mix of overhead maps and small 3D sections. Overall, A View to a Kill, the computer game, received mixed reviews. Some reviewers found the gameplay repetitive, while others enjoyed the action sequences and connection to the film.